Hello and welcome back to another book review. First of all, if you're new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day on both fiction and non-fiction books. So if you're looking for some reading inspiration or if you just like following book reviews, then feel free to stick around. Today I am going to be reviewing Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. So this is a book that I found on the news shelf of my library, and the title intrigued me. I thought it was kind of funny, and after reading the back of the book, I determined it was going to be something akin to a cozy mystery. I really enjoy cozy mysteries, so I decided to take the book home with me and give it a read. Now, I did not realize this when I was standing in the library, but when I got it home, I realized that the author, Jessie Q. Sutanto, was also the author of Dial A For Aunties. I believe the review of that is on my channel, but this book is one I have read before for my book club. So I am part of a book club, and one of the books we chose one month was Dial A For Aunties, and I thought it was really funny. One of the things I wasn't so keen on in Dial A For Aunties was the romance. I just don't usually like romance in books, or if there is romance, I prefer if it plays a little bit smaller of a role, or if it's complemented by maybe a fantasy or sci-fi plot line, then I can tolerate it. But if it's just romance or there's a lot of heavy focus on the romance, I tend to not like it. And Dial A For Aunties was a really funny book, I thought, but the emphasis was just a little too much on the romance. So once I realized that this was the same author as Dial A For Aunties, and therefore I was assuming the same humor level, I thought maybe this could be the book I was wanting. The book that had her humor and the author's style, but focused less on, say, the romance and more on the solving of the mystery. So the plot of this is Vera Wong lives in Chinatown. She owns a tea shop, which isn't really doing well despite being called a world famous tea shop in her business title. She has her one customer every single day. Her life is very much the same, but she's just going through life. One day though, things kind of erupt in her life. She comes downstairs to the tea shop to find a deceased man, and this is something interesting, unique, and new. She calls the police show up, but she doesn't really think the police are doing a very competent job. This is all told with the humorous narration style of Vera, who's I would say more or less our main narrator. And she decides to take things into her own hands. She decides that a murderer would return to the scene of the crime, so she waits around at the tea shop, and sure enough, 4 individuals show up. Normally her tea shop only gets 1 visitor, or regular, but today we have 4 other people show up. We have a woman named Sana, who's an artist struggling with creative block. We have Riki, who seems to be harboring some secrets about his relationship with the deceased, whose name is Marshall, by the way. We have Julia, who is Marshall's ex-wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife. They were in the process of separating when Marshall died. And we have Oliver, who is Marshall's twin brother, who kind of had a little bit of a grudge against Marshall because Marshall was always the better twin, the more attractive twin, the more popular twin. So these 4 suspects show up. Vera decides one of these has to be the murderers because murderers return to the scene of the crime, and she begins her investigation, which gives her something new and a renewed purpose in her life. Overall, it was very cozy mystery-esque. I really enjoyed the mystery element, and I also was correct in my suspicion. The book does have some romantic overtones or elements, but the focus is primarily on the murder mystery, and I thought that was really nice, and the author's humor could come through without, in my personal opinion, and this is my personal taste, having the romance get in the way. There are still those romantic elements for those of you who like a little romance in your books, but for me it wasn't too overpowering to overshadow the primary plot, which was the murder mystery. So some of the things I did like about this book, and overall I did really enjoy this book. It would probably be a 4 out of 5 star. Very, very enjoyable. Probably a little better than your average cozy mystery. I like the narrator's tone, the narrator's humor. I find it all very enjoyable. I really like Jessie Q. Sutanto as an author. I liked Vera's narration. I like her as a narrator, but there were multiple narrators, so each suspect, Riki, Sana, Julia, and Oliver, were at times the narrators, so there were other narrator voices, but I liked Vera as a narrator. I thought her sections were particularly good, and I liked the way that the author explored the relationships with each other that these 4 characters have, and the relationships that develop throughout the course of the book. I did solve the murder about 80% of the way through, or I realized who had done the murder about 80% of the way through before it was revealed in the book, but I didn't understand the motive until a couple pages before the motive was revealed, so that's just something to note. But I don't think it was necessarily easy to solve. I just figured it out from putting some pieces together. Some things that I wish were a little different in this book that maybe could have pushed it up to that 5-star. Like I mentioned, there's other narrative perspectives. The other characters get narrative chapters, so each chapter will say who it's narrated by. For example, this is narrated by Vera, but we have this one narrated by Sana. I personally liked Vera as the narrator, and I wish the author had put a little bit more emphasis on her narration chapters. I feel like maybe for a little bit there, they kind of deviated from her being the main narrator and some of the other characters got mixed up, but I would have liked Vera to maybe discover some of the things, or things to have been told from Vera's perspective as we went through the book. I did appreciate that. And also there was one little thing that had to do with Julia. So Julia was Marshall's soon-to-be ex-wife. Marshall, the main murder, well, not the main murder suspect, the person who got murdered, Marshall, was in the process of leaving his wife. He announced to his wife the night that he was murdered that he was leaving her. He had struck it rich and no longer needed her, and he walked out on the family, including his young son. Excuse me. Julia realizes that she's had a problematic relationship with Marshall, but so this death comes as a shock, but also she's having to process the grief of this man that she thought was going to be with her forever until literally hours before he died has walked out in the family. So there's all these complicated emotions. And on page 226 and 227, there's a paragraph that says, then of course she remembers that the only reason Vera is here is because Marshall is dead. Julia is devastated by Marshall's death. Of course she is, but a tiny part of her is grateful that such a tragedy could lead to such a blessing. And I feel like that was really the only time we saw Julia's grief come out, and it was the author telling us that she had grief about this, or the author through the narrative voice of Julia saying, I have grief over my husband's death. And I think the author could have shown that a little bit more. I think the author could have played a little bit more with the feelings of relief as Julia realizes what a kind of bad relationship she was in, but also there would be a lot of guilt about feeling that relief because your husband is dead. I feel like even if your husband was not a great person, even if you felt a little relief from your husband's death, there would be a lot of guilt associated with that because you're having these feelings of relief in association with someone's death. And also, this was very new. The whole divorce thing was very new, and I feel like the author didn't really emphasize the grief about the divorce or the grief about Marshall's death as much with Julia. She kind of relied on telling us that she was feeling grief instead of showing us that she was feeling grief. And I feel like that could have been done a little bit better, and that chapter, or those sentences, really pointed out that I was really wanting more showing of Julia's grief instead of just kind of this blasé brushing over, oh yeah, I feel grief of course, but it's a little bit of a relief. Like that felt a little bit too lighthearted for the circumstances that was happening in their relationship at that time. Overall, like I said, a 4-star read. I really enjoyed this book and I think it was really well done. I did like it more than Dial A For Aunties, so if you liked Dial A For Aunties and you also like murder mysteries or cozy mysteries, I would recommend giving this one a try. Also, if you just like cozy mysteries but you didn't read Dial A For Aunties, Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers might be an enjoyable read for you to try out. Either way, if you've read this book, if you want to read this book, if you have any thoughts or comments on this book, please leave it in the comments below. I love to receive them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.